The silence that descended upon Bright Dawn Monastery each morning was not an absence of sound, but a profound, resonant presence, heavy with the scent of damp redwood bark and the lingering chill of the pre-dawn mist. It was a silence unbroken by the frantic hum of the modern world, a quiet deep enough to hear the soft flutter of a sparrow's wings or the distant murmur of the Pacific. And it was in this hallowed stillness, just as the first streaks of rose and gold bled into the eastern sky, that three women, bound by habit and devotion, would vanish without a trace on a crisp June morning in 2013, leaving behind only the chilling echoes of a peace shattered. Before the chaos there was only routine, as ancient and comforting as the towering trees that cradled the monastery. Mother Evelyn, a woman whose eyes held the serene depth of a mountain lake and whose hands, though aged, moved with a surprising grace, was already awake. Her private cell, spare and immaculate, was bathed in the faint glow of a single votive candle. For decades, she had guided Bright Dawn, a small, independent order nestled deep in the coastal mountains of Oregon, overseeing its modest herb gardens, the production of artisanal soaps, and the quiet rhythm of prayer. Her wisdom was a bedrock for the community, her faith a constant flame that never flickered, even as the world beyond their redwood sanctuary grew increasingly turbulent. Down the long, cool corridor, a different kind of energy stirred. Sister Bella, younger than Mother Evelyn by 2 decades, was a whirlwind of practical efficiency. Her habit, though worn, was always neat, her movements purposeful. She was the monastery's engine, managing everything from the kitchen provisions to the intricate schedule of their small online store, ensuring the humble enterprise remained self-sufficient. Her spirit was as robust as the sturdy oak outside her window, a blend of earthy pragmatism and unwavering devotion. While Mother Evelyn contemplated the eternal, Sister Bella wrestled with inventory and shipping, her quiet prayers often accompanied by the clatter of pots or the hum of the old washing machine. And then there was Lily. Barely 20, a novitiate still finding her footing in the austere beauty of monastic life. Her cell, just 2 doors down from Sister Bella's, still held a faint, almost imperceptible scent of the secular world, a hint of lavender from a sachet her mother had given her, a forgotten bookmark from a novel hidden beneath her pillow. The silence of the monastery, so comforting to Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella, sometimes felt vast and overwhelming to Lily, a chasm in which her own doubts echoed back at her. She'd come seeking solace, a refuge from a world that felt too loud, too demanding, but the true quiet had a way of magnifying the turmoil within. She was the last to rise, often lingering in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, a delicate balance poised on the edge of profound change. As the first bell tolled for matins, its clear, resonant peal carrying through the damp air, the 3 women, each in their own way, prepared for the day. Mother Evelyn moved with silent reverence, her thoughts already on the ancient texts. Sister Bella tied the apron over her habit with a brisk, decisive knot, mentally mapping out the day's tasks, and Lily, with a sigh that was almost imperceptible, swung her thin legs out of bed, her gaze drifting towards the towering redwood trees outside her window, their ancient shadows still clinging to the morning light. They did not know this was the last dawn they would greet within the monastery walls. The rhythmic cadence of their morning prayers, a balm Mother Evelyn had always relied upon, felt subtly out of sync that week. It began with the calls. Not a single jarring incident, but a series of low, insistent hums on the monastery's ancient landline, always hanging up before anyone could answer. Then came the emails, forwarded by Sister Bella from their modest online store's generic inbox. They were brief, badly worded, and initially dismissed as spam. But one, in particular, had snagged Mother Evelyn's attention, its crude syntax sharpened by a chillingly specific threat. "Know you got something worth taking. Better give it up, or we come for it." Mother Evelyn read the email twice, her gaze unwavering, even as the words seemed to crawl across the screen. She didn't flinch, didn't sigh. Instead, a familiar stillness settled over her, a quiet strength forged by years of navigating life's unexpected currents. This was not the typical harassment they sometimes received from online trolls or misguided individuals. This felt different, more tangible, more predatory. She forwarded it to Sister Bella's personal monastic email address, adding only, "Please look into this," with discernment. Sister Bella, hunched over her laptop in the small cluttered office that doubled as the shipping station, felt a jolt of genuine fear when she saw the message. Unlike Mother Evelyn, whose faith often translated into an almost stoic acceptance, Bella was a woman of action and immediate concern. She had worked tirelessly to ensure Bright Dawn Monastery's financial stability, nurturing their small businesses, the herbals, the soaps, the online retreats, into a modest yet reliable source of income. The idea that someone might try to exploit their humble success to threaten the very sanctuary they had built ignited a fierce protectiveness within her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing IP addresses, searching for any digital footprint, but the sender had been careful, leaving no obvious trail. "They want something," she murmured to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. But what? The unspoken tension rippled through the monastery, subtle as a breath of wind but undeniably present. Lily, with her heightened sensitivity, felt it most acutely. The once comforting quiet now seemed to hum with an undercurrent of unease. She overheard whispered conversations between the older sisters, caught glimpses of Mother Evelyn's pensive expression, and saw the worried lines etched around Sister Bella's usually cheerful eyes. Lily found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, a strange prickle of apprehension on her skin, even during the most mundane tasks. The sacred space, which had promised serenity, now felt fragile, as if something unseen lurked just beyond its tranquil boundaries. One afternoon, while tending to the lavender bushes in the sun-drenched herb garden, Lily saw Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella in a hushed conversation near the old stone well. Mother Evelyn's voice was low, calm, almost melodic, but Sister Bella's gestures were quick, agitated. Lily couldn't make out the words, but the intensity of their exchange was palpable. A cold knot tightened in Lily's stomach. She knew, with the instinctive certainty of youth, that something was profoundly wrong. The peace she had sought here, the quiet she craved, was being threatened. And as the days bled into weeks and the anonymous threats continued to trickle in, a distinct, unsettling question began to form in the shadows of Lily's mind. What exactly were they protecting? The final hours before the disappearance of Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, and novitiate Lily unfolded under a sky of deceptive serenity. The sun, a warm benediction, poured over Bright Dawn Monastery, illuminating the vibrant greens of the redwood canopy and painting the distant Pacific a hazy blue. Yet, beneath this tranquil veneer, a taut wire of apprehension hummed, a discord Mother Evelyn felt acutely as she moved through her daily tasks. She pruned roses in the small enclosed garden, her movements precise, but her mind was elsewhere, sifting through the vague threats, trying to find a pattern, a vulnerability. Her natural calm was a carefully maintained edifice, protecting the sisters from the creeping fear that had begun to take root. Later that afternoon, the tension crystallized in the small Spartan office. Mother Evelyn sat across from Sister Bella, the worn wooden table between them cluttered with ledgers and printouts of the unsettling emails. Sister Bella, usually so methodical, paced the small room, her brow furrowed, a restless energy radiating from her. "I've cross-referenced everything," Sister Bella said, her voice tight with frustration. "The IP addresses are cloaked, the email accounts are burner accounts. Whoever this is, they're not amateurs with tech, but their language, it's so crude, so contradictory. Money and property, it's like they don't even know what they want specifically from us." Mother Evelyn folded her hands on the table, her gaze steady. They want something, and they believe we have it. We must consider every possibility. Have you noticed any strangers near the perimeter? Any unusual vehicles on the access road?" Sister Bella shook her head, running a hand through her short, practical hair. "I've been checking the trail cameras, but nothing definitive. Just hikers, a few deer. But what about the security system? Should we invest in something more robust? Or perhaps alert the local police more formally?" Sheriff McKenna didn't seem to take it very seriously when we first called about the strange hang-ups. "We must be prudent, Bella," Mother Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm. "We cannot afford to alarm the other sisters, nor to make ourselves a target by drawing undue attention. If these individuals are indeed monitoring us, an overt display of security could provoke them. We will double-check all locks tonight, ensure the gate is secured, and we will pray. We have little of material value, Bella, but perhaps they perceive our quiet self-sufficiency as a sign of hidden wealth." Her eyes held a flicker of concern, a rare crack in her composed facade. "Protecting the sisters is paramount, all of them." Meanwhile, just as the evening shadows began to lengthen, painting the monastery courtyard in shades of cool gray, Lily felt a profound weariness settle into her bones. She was in the small library, dusting the ancient theological texts, their leather bindings smelling of old paper and dust. Her hand paused on a worn copy of The Cloud of Unknowing, its pages filled with abstract spiritual concepts that suddenly felt profoundly distant. She had sought refuge in Bright Dawn, a quiet haven where the clamor of the outside world couldn't reach her, where the path to purpose was supposedly clear. But the recent unsettling atmosphere, the hushed anxieties of Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella, had only amplified her own gnawing doubts. Was this truly her calling? Could she commit to a life of unwavering faith when, even within these hallowed walls, fear could still seep in, and earthly threats could shatter their peace? The cloistered life, once a comforting embrace, now felt like a fragile shell, vulnerable to the unseen forces lurking just beyond their gates. The thought of leaving, a whisper she had long suppressed, now resonated with a disquieting clarity. She imagined packing her few belongings, slipping away into the encroaching twilight, leaving the silence, the prayers, and the growing shadow behind. Unbeknownst to her, and to Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella, a decision was about to be made for them all, not by choice, but by a chilling, unseen hand. Sister Margaret, usually the first to rise after Mother Evelyn, stirred in her narrow bed, a frown creasing her brow. The silence was not the deep, peaceful quiet of the early hours, but an unsettling void, an absence of the familiar chime that had marked every dawn for decades. She glanced at her small alarm clock, 5:05 a.m. The bell should have rung 5 minutes ago. Mother Evelyn was meticulously punctual. Her presence was the monastery's internal clock. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way up Sister Margaret's spine. She rose quickly, pulling on her simple habit, her movements uncharacteristically swift. The corridor was still and dimly lit, the other cell silent. This was unusual. Usually, by now, the soft sounds of sisters preparing for prayer, a rustle of fabric, a quiet cough, the faint splash of water, would be audible. Sister Margaret hurried to Mother Evelyn's cell, knocking softly. No answer. She tried the handle. It turned. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, the single votive candle on the small prayer desk extinguished, precisely as Mother Evelyn would leave it. But Mother Evelyn was not there. A knot of anxiety tightened in Sister Margaret's stomach. She moved down the corridor, her bare feet silent on the cold stone, a sense of growing dread her only companion. Next, Sister Bella's cell. Also empty. The bed rumpled, a book left open on the bedside table. Bella rarely left things untidy. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. Finally, she reached Lily's cell. A faint scent of something floral lingered in the air. a reminder of the young novitiate's fleeting connection to the outside world. Empty. The small wooden cross on her wall hung perfectly straight, but the bed was untouched, as if she had never even slept in it. Sister Margaret's breath hitched. She raced through the monastery, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The small kitchen, usually filled with the comforting scent of brewing coffee and fresh bread, was dark and cold. The chapel, where they gathered for morning prayers, was hushed, the rows of pews waiting in vain. The workrooms, the herb garden, the small office where Sister Bella managed their affairs. All silent, all empty of the 3 women who should have been there. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no frantic scratches on the ancient wooden floors. The windows were latched, the heavy monastery doors still secured from the inside, just as Sister Bella would have left them the night before. It was as if they had simply evaporated into the thin Oregon air. The inexplicable absence was more chilling than any sign of violence could have been. It was a perfect, unsettling void, leaving only Sister Margaret to confront the horrifying truth. Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, and Novitiate Lily were gone. The monastery, once a beacon of peace, now felt like a hollowed-out shell, echoing with an unbearable emptiness. The distress call reached Sheriff Jonathan "Jack" McKenna's office in Ridgewood just after 8:02 a.m. It was Sister Agnes, her voice trembling, almost unintelligible through the static of the old phone line that stretched out to Bright Dawn Monastery. Jack, a man whose 40-odd years in law enforcement had imbued him with a healthy dose of cynicism and an even healthier respect for coffee, listened with half an ear as he stirred sugar into his mug. Disappearances weren't unheard of in the isolated, wooded corners of Oregon, but 3 nuns, that was a new one. "They're just gone, Sheriff," Sister Agnes wailed, the terror in her voice finally cutting through his morning stupor. "Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, and Novitiate Lily. Their cells are empty, the chapel, the refectory. No one's seen them since last night." Jack let out a slow breath, setting down his mug. "All right, sister, calm down. Take a deep breath. Gone. How, exactly? Did they leave a note? Pack a bag? Sometimes people just decide to take a trip, you know. Even nuns." He'd seen it all. Teenagers running away, spouses abandoning families, even folks faking their own deaths for insurance scams. A nun taking a spontaneous vacation wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility, however unlikely it sounded. He knew the Bright Dawn Monastery was pretty isolated, and their order valued self-sufficiency. Maybe they just took off for a spiritual retreat without telling anyone? "A trip?" Sister Agnes's voice rose, incredulous. "Sheriff, this is Bright Dawn Monastery. We do not take trips without planning, without permission. Mother Evelyn is meticulous. Sister Bella is devoted to her duties. And Lily. She wouldn't leave without a word. Not like this. There are no signs of anything. No open windows, no broken doors. It's as if they just vanished." 20 minutes later, the sheriff's patrol car, a sturdy, mud-splattered Ford Explorer, crunched gravel as it pulled up to the weathered wooden gate of Bright Dawn Monastery. The air here was different, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, hushed save for the distant cry of a hawk. Jack, a man of average height with tired eyes and a perpetually 5 o'clock shadow, stepped out, surveying the ancient stone buildings that seemed to melt into the surrounding redwood forest. He adjusted his Stetson, feeling the cool, damp air seep into his bones. Sister Agnes, a small, trembling woman with anxious eyes, met him at the main door, clutching a worn rosary. Behind her, a handful of other sisters, their faces pale and etched with worry, gathered in the arched entryway. Their collective anxiety was a palpable force, a stark contrast to the sheriff's initial skepticism. "Sheriff McKenna," Sister Agnes began, her voice still shaky, "thank you for coming so quickly." "Just Jack, sister," he replied, giving a curt nod. His eyes, however, were already sweeping the monastery grounds, taking in the quiet order of everything. Too quiet. "All right, let's talk. You're saying 3 adult women just walked away from a locked building without a trace." He listened as Sister Agnes, joined by a Sister Martha, recounted the details of the empty cells, the silent chapel, the lack of any disturbance. Sister Martha, a no-nonsense woman who managed the monastery's gardens, interjected with firm conviction. "Mother Evelyn has never missed matins in 30 years, Sheriff. Never. And Sister Bella, she wakes before the sun to prepare the day's bread. This isn't a trip. This is something else." Jack listened, his initial assumptions slowly giving way to a grudging acceptance of the oddity of the situation. He saw the genuine distress in their faces, the unshakable certainty in their voices. These women lived by routine, by devotion. A spontaneous departure without a note, without a word, was indeed highly improbable. As he stepped further inside the cool, silent monastery, the absence felt less like a choice and more like a void. The unsettling feeling from Sister Agnes's phone call began to solidify into a cold, hard knot in his gut. This wasn't just a missing persons report. It was a mystery that had just begun to unfold. The call went out. Not through official channels at first, but through the tight-knit network of Ridgewood and its surrounding rural communities. Sheriff Jack McKenna, while maintaining a poker face for his deputies, knew that formal search and rescue could take hours to mobilize. This was a place where people looked out for their own, even reclusive nuns. By midday, a growing convoy of pickup trucks and SUVs was snaking up the winding, unpaved road towards Bright Dawn Monastery. Hunters, loggers, retired park rangers, and even a few of the more adventurous townspeople, armed with maps, radios, and a grim determination, arrived to offer their help. The redwood forest that enveloped the monastery was a formidable, ancient beast. Its towering sentinels, centuries old, formed a dense, almost impenetrable canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual, damp twilight. The ground was a treacherous tapestry of gnarled roots, moss-covered rocks, and fallen logs, often slick with recent rain. Creeks carved deep, hidden ravines and thick undergrowth, thorny and tenacious, clawed at anything that tried to pass. It was a beautiful, majestic wilderness, but also one that could swallow a person whole, leaving no trace. Jack McKenna, usually comfortable in these woods, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air as he stood at the makeshift command post set up near the monastery gate. He watched the volunteers fan out, their bright vests a stark contrast against the muted greens and browns of the forest. He'd seen desperate searches before, but this one felt different. The lack of any struggle, any sign of forced entry, gnawed at him. It suggested either an almost supernatural stealth or a voluntary departure, which, given the sisters' fervent denials, seemed increasingly unlikely. He directed teams to focus on the immediate perimeter first, the winding trails leading to the small creek, the path to the overlook point, the dense groves of sequoia closest to the monastery walls. He joined one of the teams himself, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves, his eyes scanning every shadow, every cluster of ferns. They called out names: Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, Lily. Their voices, loud at first, were quickly swallowed by the vast silence of the trees, a chilling echo in the immense quiet. Hours bled into afternoon, and then into the deepening gloom of early evening. The air grew colder, the light faded, and still nothing. No discarded habit, no footprint, no snapped twig that didn't belong. The volunteers, initially buoyant with a sense of purpose, grew weary, their faces drawn. The cheerful chatter had given way to hushed calls, then to tired silence. Jack could see it in their eyes. The growing realization that this wasn't just a simple case of someone getting lost. As the sun dipped below the jagged western horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest, Sheriff McKenna stood at the edge of a steep ravine, staring into the impenetrable darkness below. The scale of the forest, its unforgiving nature, pressed down on him. The sheer difficulty of finding anyone in such a vast, tangled wilderness became acutely, terrifyingly clear. His initial cynicism had fully evaporated, replaced by a cold, unsettling dread. This was no ordinary disappearance. This was a puzzle with no obvious pieces, a void that defied logic. And as the night promised to descend, bringing with it an even deeper, more dangerous darkness, Jack knew, with chilling certainty, that time was not on their side. The second day of the search dawned gray and relentless, mirroring the mood of the volunteers. The initial burst of adrenaline had faded, replaced by the grim exhaustion of fruitless effort. Sheriff McKenna, his face drawn from lack of sleep, barked orders through a crackling radio directing teams further out, expanding the grid. The vastness of the forest felt less like a sanctuary and more like an accomplice to a vanishing act. Then, just before noon, a faint shout echoed through the trees from the north side of the monastery, near a small, rocky creek that meandered towards the main access road. Deputy Miller, a young officer still keen to impress, was the one to find it. Tucked beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient cedar, half submerged in the shallow, frigid water of the creek, was a single, flimsy canvas shoe. It was a simple, light-colored sneaker, the kind not typically worn by nuns, especially not for daily chores in the monastery's rugged terrain. It was Lily's. A chill, far colder than the creek water, snaked through Jack McKenna. He knelt, examining the shoe. It was damp, slightly muddy, but otherwise intact. No blood, no obvious signs of a struggle near it. But the sheer improbability of it being there, abandoned and out of place, was a jarring anomaly. Nuns, particularly novitiates like Lily, didn't just kick off their shoes in the middle of a creek. Moments later, another volunteer, a retired logger named Frank, called out from deeper in the dense undergrowth. He'd found something tangled in a thorny blackberry bush, a small metallic object no bigger than a man's thumb. Jack took it carefully. It was a cheap, plastic-coated button, the kind you'd find on a work jacket or a utility vest. It wasn't monastic. It wasn't the sturdy, natural fabric of a habit. It was foreign, a stark, glaring piece of the outside world, forcefully brought into their sacred, isolated domain. These small, disparate clues began to coalesce in McKenna's mind, chipping away at the dwindling possibilities of an accident or a voluntary departure. A sudden, violent fall would likely leave more obvious signs. A runaway would take her shoes, or at least leave a note. The presence of a secular button, a cheap piece of hardware, cemented a new, more sinister possibility. Abduction. Someone had been here. Someone from outside. Back in Ridgewood, the news had spread like wildfire, fueled by the volunteers returning home with grim faces and hushed whispers. The disappearance of the three nuns had become the singular topic of conversation, overriding the usual local gossip. Over coffee at the town diner or beers at the saloon, theories swirled. They must have run away, joined some radical cult. No, it's those crazy preppers living out in the hills. They're always up to no good. Remember those strange threats about money? Someone must have thought the monastery was rich. The more sensational the rumor, the faster it spread, adding layers of anxiety and speculation to the already tense atmosphere. For Sheriff McKenna, however, the noise of the town faded into the background. The shoe and the button were concrete. They pointed to intrusion, to intent. The scale of the search expanded again, this time with a grim focus, not just on finding lost individuals, but on uncovering evidence of a crime. He ordered a deeper dive into the monastery's modest finances, wondering if there was something, anything, that could have drawn the attention of criminals. The quiet calm of Bright Dawn Monastery, once its defining characteristic, now felt like a shroud, concealing a truth that was just beginning to emerge, cold and sharp as a sliver of ice in the dark heart of the redwood forest. The sun was already dipping below the western ridge, painting the sky in fiery oranges and bruised purples when the call came into Sheriff McKenna's office. It wasn't a call from a search party or a tip line. It was from a frantic homeowner on the outskirts of Ridgewood, barely a mile from the main highway. "Sheriff, you gotta get here. There are 3 women on my porch. They look like those nuns from the monastery." Jack felt a jolt go through him, a mix of disbelief and a surging, cautious hope. He was out the door and in his patrol car within seconds, sirens wailing as he sped through the quiet streets. The drive felt agonizingly long, each turn bringing him closer to an answer he wasn't sure he was ready for. He found them huddled together on the small, unassuming porch of a faded blue ranch house silhouetted against the dimming light. Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, and Novitiate Lily. They were alive. But their appearance was a stark testament to their ordeal. Their habits, once pristine and symbolizing their devotion, were torn and stained with mud, streaks of dirt, and what looked like dried leaves and twigs. Their faces were hollowed out, etched with a profound exhaustion that went beyond mere fatigue. Mother Evelyn's serene composure was fractured, her eyes wide and haunted. Sister Bella, usually so animated, was hunched over, shivering uncontrollably, her strong hands clasped tight. And Lily, the youngest, looked utterly broken, her eyes vacant, staring fixedly at something only she could see. She had a long, angry scratch running down her cheek, and her bare feet were bruised and swollen, still bearing the marks of the arduous journey without her shoe. A kind woman from the house, Mrs. Henderson, had wrapped them in blankets and offered them water, which they drank greedily, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Jack approached slowly, his usual police-issue swagger replaced by a careful reverence. "Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, Lily, are you all right?" Mother Evelyn looked up, her gaze slowly focusing on him. "Sheriff," she whispered, her voice a reedy rasp, like dry leaves rustling. They took us." Sister Bella managed to nod, a single tear tracing a clean path down her dirt-streaked cheek. "They wanted money. They said the monastery had money. They hit us. Not hard. But they threatened. They threatened Lily." Her voice broke, choking on the words. Lily, however, said nothing. She simply shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, her gaze still fixed on some invisible point beyond the porch. Her silence was more unsettling than any of their whispered, disjointed words. Jack immediately called for paramedics and backup. He tried to get more details, but their accounts were fragmented, disjointed by exhaustion and trauma. They spoke of being driven blindfolded, of rough hands, of a cold, damp place, and of relentless questions about the monastery's hidden wealth. Their narrative was a mosaic of fear and confusion, revealing little specific information, but confirming the worst of his growing suspicions. This was indeed an abduction, and as the ambulance lights began to flash in the deepening twilight, painting the scene in stark red and blue, Jack knew the real investigation, and the truth was only just beginning. The small examination room at Ridgewood Community Hospital hummed with the hushed efficiency of medical professionals. The paramedics, after a quick assessment, had deemed the nuns stable, albeit severely dehydrated and suffering from exposure and minor abrasions. As doctors worked to rehydrate them and tend to their physical wounds, Sheriff McKenna sat in a sterile waiting area, sipping lukewarm coffee, his mind replaying the fractured accounts from the porch. Later, in a quieter room with a female deputy present, Jack began the formal interviews. Mother Evelyn, despite her profound weariness, spoke with a fragile but discernible clarity. Her voice was still raspy, but her answers, though brief, were direct. She recounted being roused from her sleep by masked figures, the chilling command for silence, the blindfolds, and the rough, disorienting ride. "They kept asking about the monastery's hidden wealth," she rasped, her eyes flickering with a rekindled spark of indignation. "We tried to explain, Sheriff, that our wealth is spiritual, not material, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced we had some secret fund, some gold buried under the grounds." She described a small, damp room, a makeshift cell that smelled of mildew and stale air. They were given stale bread and water, but often went hungry. She mentioned rough handling, not outright violence, but enough to instill terror. Sister Bella, interviewed separately, echoed much of Mother Evelyn's narrative. Her account was more emotional, punctuated by shivers and hurried breaths. She described the fear, the constant uncertainty, and the chilling sensation of being utterly powerless. "They kept us in what felt like a shack," she recounted, her voice trembling. "Somewhere deep in the woods. I heard the sound of a creek nearby, and once the distant cry of a crow. They talked among themselves, low voices, but I heard them mention Ridgewood once or twice." She also emphasized the relentless questioning about money, about investments, about donations. Her fear for Lily was palpable. They seemed agitated when we couldn't produce what they wanted, like they were running out of patience. But when it came to Lily, the narrative fractured. The young novitiate sat huddled on the hospital bed, a pristine white blanket pulled up to her chin, her eyes darting nervously around the room, avoiding eye contact with Sheriff McKenna. Her responses were hesitant, disjointed, sometimes dissolving into tearful silences. She spoke of being scared, of the cold, of the dark. When asked about the shack or the creek, she would nod vaguely, then shake her head, her memory seemingly a blur of terror. I don't remember much," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was so dark, and they yelled a lot. She couldn't recall specific details about the kidnappers' voices, their numbers, or any distinct features of their captivity beyond the omnipresent fear. She vaguely mentioned being pushed around, but couldn't specify if she was struck or shoved." Jack listened patiently, taking copious notes. The core story, abduction, demand for money, rough treatment, and release, remained consistent across all three. Yet the subtle discrepancies began to prick at his experienced ear. Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella spoke of a shack and a creek with a degree of certainty, even though their blindfold should have obscured any visual clues. Lily's vagueness, while understandable given her trauma, felt almost too absolute, a blank slate where even fragments might be expected. And while the older nuns spoke of being hit, Lily only mentioned being pushed, a subtle but potentially significant difference. His gaze lingered on Lily's bruised feet, the deep scratch on her cheek. Those were real. The fear in her eyes was real. But the inconsistencies, small as they were, created a ripple of suspicion in the calm surface of his investigation. He knew trauma could warp memory, but these specific divergences felt almost like carefully constructed omissions. As he left the hospital, the crisp Oregon night air offered no clarity, only the unsettling thought that while 3 women had miraculously returned, the full truth of what had transpired in the redwood shadows was still very much hidden. The morning after the nuns' return was a whirlwind of activity for the Ridgewood Sheriff's Department. With actual victims and a coherent, if fragmented, narrative, the investigation could finally shift into high gear. Sheriff McKenna assigned deputies to canvass the area where the nuns had reappeared, looking for any discarded items, tire tracks, or signs of recent activity. Forensic teams, called in from the state lab, were dispatched to Bright Dawn Monastery to meticulously comb the grounds for anything the initial searches might have missed, focusing now on potential points of entry or hidden clues. Based on Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella's descriptions of a shack and the sound of a creek, McKenna ordered a concentrated aerial search using a drone, followed by ground teams targeting remote, undeveloped parcels of land upriver from the monastery and closer to the general direction of Ridgewood. The goal was to locate any makeshift structures or abandoned cabins that might have served as a holding site. The plastic-coated button found near the creek was sent off for analysis, though McKenna didn't hold much hope for DNA on such a small, non-porous item. Meanwhile, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling about Lily's testimony. While Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella, though shaken, had presented remarkably consistent details about their captivity, the duration, the demands for money, the sense of being held in a crude, damp structure, Lily's memory remained stubbornly blank. He'd seen shell-shocked victims before, but Lily's evasiveness felt different, almost deliberate in its vagueness. He reviewed the interview transcripts again, highlighting every instance where Lily offered only a shrug or a whispered, "I don't remember." He even brought in a trauma specialist, a kindly, experienced woman named Dr. Evans, who confirmed Lily's profound distress but couldn't definitively explain the selective amnesia. "It's possible she's just shut down," Dr. Evans had explained gently, her mind protecting itself from the worst of it. Or perhaps she simply wasn't in the same state of awareness as the others at certain times. McKenna nodded, but the seed of doubt remained. Days later, the investigative breakthroughs began. A property owner, several miles north of the monastery, following up on a tip from the expanded ground search, reported a dilapidated hunting cabin on his remote acreage that had clearly been recently occupied. Inside, forensic teams found crude rope marks on a wooden post, faint impressions on the dirt floor, and discarded remnants of cheap fast food packaging, consistent with a short, rough captivity. The location was indeed near a creek and fit the general direction the nuns had indicated. More crucially, the button led them to a local pawn shop, and from there to a couple of known associates, two brothers, Lyle and Dwayne Dewey Jenkins. The Jenkins brothers were small-time, known for petty theft, minor B&Es, and a history of drug problems. They were the kind of low-level criminals who got arrested for trying to shoplift a frozen turkey. Not masterminds. When Jack looked at their mugshots, his suspicions intensified. The Jenkins brothers were unsophisticated. Their criminal records were filled with bungled attempts and quick arrests. The idea of them orchestrating a complex abduction, let alone meticulously covering their digital tracks with burner emails and cloaked IP addresses, seemed utterly out of character. Their typical modus operandi involved breaking a window, grabbing what they could, and running. This was a step, or perhaps a dozen steps, beyond their usual repertoire. Their motives, too, felt murky. If they were looking for money, why would they target a self-sufficient monastery known for its modest income? Did they truly believe Bright Dawn had hidden wealth, or were they merely desperate, grasping at rumors? The demands for money didn't fit their profile of impulsive, low-stakes thieves. As Jack stared at the crude faces on the printouts, a cold certainty settled over him. These men were involved, but they felt like pieces of a larger, incomplete puzzle. And the biggest, most unsettling piece seemed to lie somewhere in the unspoken gaps within the nuns' own accounts. Sheriff Jack McKenna stood before the three nuns in the monastery's modest common room, the scent of antiseptic from their recent hospital stay still clinging to them. The Jenkins brothers were in custody, picked up easily at a rundown motel on the edge of town, barely putting up a fight, but the pieces of the puzzle still didn't quite fit. And Jack knew, with the cold certainty of an experienced cop, that the truth was messier than anyone wanted to admit. He held up a grainy photo of Lyle and Dewey Jenkins. Mother Evelyn, Sister Bella, Lily. Do these men look familiar to you? Mother Evelyn's eyes, though still weary, narrowed. "Yes," she said softly, her voice firmer than it had been at the hospital. "They were the ones, the two who held us." Sister Bella nodded vehemently, her hand instinctively going to Lily's shoulder. "Good," Jack said, his voice flat, "because we have them. They're talking, and their story, while confirming they took you, contradicts some of what you've told us." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching their reactions. Mother Evelyn's gaze remained steady, but a subtle tremor ran through Sister Bella's frame, and Lily flinched, pulling back slightly from Sister Bella's touch. "They claim," Jack continued, his eyes fixed on Lily, "that they never hit anyone. They say they were clumsy, not violent, and they claim you weren't blindfolded the entire time. They say they even provided you with a chance to escape." A tense silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the wood-burning stove in the corner. Mother Evelyn finally spoke, her voice measured. "Sheriff, the terror of such an ordeal can distort memory. We were disoriented, frightened." "I understand that, Mother Evelyn," Jack acknowledged, his tone unwavering. "But the Jenkins brothers are low-level grifters. They confessed to the emails, the threats. They were desperate. Thought this monastery was sitting on some forgotten trust fund or old valuables maybe from the church's earlier days. They heard some half-baked rumors, probably from a disgruntled former parishioner, about how rich the church secretly was. They were looking for a quick score, a big payout to solve their mounting debts, not to commit a grand abduction." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze now sweeping over all three of them. They were completely unprepared for three women who had nothing but faith to give them. They were amateurs. They got scared. They didn't know what to do with you when you didn't produce millions of dollars. They admit they were confused, lost. They say they panicked. And they claim, Lily, he focused on the young novitiate, that you were the one who found a way out, that they didn't release you in the way you implied. Lily gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Tears welled in her eyes, not soft, flowing tears, but hard, desperate ones. She finally looked at Mother Evelyn, then at Sister Bella, her face contorted with a mix of shame and terror. They fell asleep," Lily stammered, her voice barely a whisper, the words tumbling out now in a rush of release. "Both of them. They were so high. They were arguing, and then they just slumped. I saw the door wasn't latched properly. I just ran. I cut my feet on the rocks, but I just kept going. I found a way out through the woods, past the creek. I ran until I couldn't breathe anymore. I didn't know where I was going. Just away." Mother Evelyn reached out and gently took Lily's trembling hand, her eyes filled with a pain that went beyond her own ordeal. Sister Bella squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping. "And why didn't you tell us this, Lily?" Jack asked, his voice softer now, sensing the raw vulnerability. Lily sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I was so scared, and I thought maybe it was my fault. For being weak, for wanting to leave. And Mother Evelyn and Sister Bella. They said it was better to keep it simple, to say we were just let go, to protect the monastery, to avoid more questions. They didn't want anyone to think we were weak, or that we had brought this upon ourselves by not being careful enough." Mother Evelyn, her voice barely audible, confirmed it. "We believed it would protect the monastery's reputation, Sheriff, to maintain the sanctity of our privacy, and to protect Lily. We were trying to simplify a terrifying ordeal, to present a unified front. We feared that if the full truth of their amateurism and Lily's brave escape came out, it might invite more trouble, or even diminish the perceived seriousness of the crime. We were ashamed that such crude individuals had violated our sanctuary. We were wrong." Jack nodded slowly. The uncomfortable truth wasn't about the Jenkins brothers being masterminds, but about the desperate, clumsy nature of the crime, and the nuns' own, well-intentioned, but ultimately flawed attempt to control the narrative. It wasn't a grand conspiracy, but a terrifying brush with amateur desperation, leading to a cover-up driven by fear, shame, and a fierce, misguided desire to protect their sacred home. The true drama, he realized, lay not just in the abduction, but in the layers of human reaction to terror and vulnerability. The apprehension that had hung over Ridgewood for days began to dissipate with the news of the Jenkins brothers' arrests. Lyle and Dewey, small fish though they were swiftly charged with kidnapping and assault. Their clumsy confession, filled with bumbling details about their ill-conceived plan and their sheer bewilderment at finding no hidden millions, painted a picture of desperate amateur criminals, not hardened masterminds. The case was closed, at least in the eyes of the law, but for the women of Bright Dawn Monastery, and for Sheriff McKenna, the healing was only just beginning. Back at the monastery, a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere settled over the sisters. The public outpouring of support was overwhelming. Donations poured in, not just money, but food, supplies, and offers of volunteer labor to help reinforce security. Neighbors who had once viewed the secluded order with a mixture of curiosity and distant respect now saw them as survivors, their vulnerability having forged a stronger bond with the community. Trucks arrived daily, bringing lumber for new fencing, and volunteers with tools and earnest faces began to arrive, eager to help protect the sanctuary. For Mother Evelyn, the aftermath was a complex tapestry of gratitude and introspection. She bore no malice towards the Jenkins brothers. Their desperation was a tragic reflection of society's brokenness. But the incident had forced her to confront the monastery's inherent vulnerability and her own attempts to shield it, and the truth, from perceived scrutiny. She had always preached humility, yet in her desire to protect, she had momentarily strayed from complete transparency. She began to hold more open discussions with the sisters, acknowledging the importance of shared vulnerability and trust, even with the outside world. The experience, while traumatic, had deepened her faith, revealing the resilience that lay beneath human fragility. Sister Bella, ever the pragmatist, channeled her trauma into furious action. She oversaw the installation of new, more robust security measures, her eyes sharp, her movements precise. She worked with the Sheriff's Department to implement new communication protocols, no longer relying solely on the old landline. Yet, beneath her renewed efficiency, a profound sense of anger simmered. Not at the kidnappers, but at the injustice of it all, at the way their peace had been so carelessly shattered. She found solace in the steady rhythms of work, in the tangible act of rebuilding, a way to anchor herself when her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. But it was Lily who underwent the most profound transformation. The initial shock slowly gave way to a quiet strength that surprised even herself. The act of recounting her escape, of owning her terror and her resourcefulness, had been a catharsis. The doubts that had plagued her about her calling, the feeling of being too soft for monastic life, now faded. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act in its presence. The harshness of the outside world, the sudden, violent intrusion into her quiet pursuit of faith, had paradoxically solidified her resolve. She found a new, fierce determination within herself, a deeper understanding of what true resilience meant. The monastery, once a place of hesitant exploration, now felt like a fortified home, a place where she had faced her deepest fears and found strength. She was no longer just a novitiate. She was a survivor, forged in the crucible of unexpected hardship, ready to commit to her path with a newfound purpose. As the weeks turned into a new season, the scars of the kidnapping slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. The sisters resumed their routines, but with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper connection to the Ridgewood community that had rallied around them. The redwood shadows still clung to the monastery walls, but now they no longer felt like a hiding place for unknown threats, but rather a reminder of the steadfast, unwavering light within. The morning sun, now a familiar friend, spilled into Bright Dawn Monastery, washing the ancient stone walls in a soft, golden glow. The air hummed not with the lingering tension of recent weeks, but with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet strength born from shared adversity. The kidnapping, a terrifying violation, had paradoxically stripped away any lingering illusions of absolute isolation, forcing the monastery to open its gates and its heart to the wider community of Ridgewood. Mother Evelyn, standing in the newly reinforced gatehouse, greeted each arriving volunteer with a warm smile and a word of thanks. The new security measures, a sturdier gate, discreet cameras, even a direct line to Sheriff McKenna's office, were tangible reminders of their brush with danger. Yet she felt no bitterness. Instead, the incident had deepened her understanding of grace and human connection. The outpouring of support from the town, the selfless efforts of strangers and neighbors had woven the monastery more tightly into the fabric of the community than any outreach program ever could. Their faith, once primarily an internal practice, now resonated outward, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of prayer, bolstered by tangible acts of kindness. Sister Bella, supervising a crew of local carpenters repairing a section of the convent roof, felt a profound shift within her. Her pragmatic nature, once solely focused on the monastery's self-sufficiency, now encompassed a broader vision of mutual dependence. She still worried about logistics and security, but her efficiency was now tempered by a newfound appreciation for the fragility of life and the importance of compassionate connection. The anger she had felt was slowly transforming into a resolve to protect not just the monastery's physical assets, but its spirit of welcome and its role as a beacon of quiet hope. And Lily. The young novitiate, her feet now healed, moved with a newfound lightness, a quiet confidence that radiated from within. The ordeal had forced her to confront her deepest fears, to push past her limitations, and in doing so, she had discovered an unwavering core of strength she never knew she possessed. The vast, overwhelming silence of the monastery that once amplified her doubts now felt like a comforting embrace, a space where she could finally hear the quiet whispers of her own true calling. She had found her courage not in escaping the world, but in confronting its shadows and choosing to stand firm. Her path, once uncertain, was now illuminated with a quiet, unshakable conviction. Sheriff Jack McKenna, making his weekly visit to check on the monastery, observed them all from the gravel path, a subtle smile touching his lips. He still saw the world through the lens of human fallibility and the harsh realities of crime. But the nuns of Bright Dawn Monastery, with their quiet resilience and their profound, unshakable faith, had left an indelible mark on him. He had seen their vulnerability, their fear, and their misguided attempt to control their story, yet he had also witnessed their unwavering spirit, their ability to find strength in unexpected places. They weren't just victims. They were a testament to the enduring human capacity for recovery, for forgiveness, and for finding light in the darkest of times. He respected their spiritual devotion, but even more, he respected their raw, unadulterated humanity. The sun climbed higher, warming the ancient stone and the fresh wood. The sound of hammering mingled with the distant chirping of birds and the faint murmur of prayers from the chapel. Bright Dawn Monastery, touched by terror, had not crumbled. Instead, it had found a new, deeper meaning, a stronger connection to the world around it. The redwood shadow, once a symbol of a harrowing abduction, now served as a powerful reminder that even when darkness encroached, the light of human spirit, courage, and unwavering faith would always, inevitably, find its new dawn.